remember, everything is nature. And so everything is a part of a habitat. When a tree falls in the forest, it makes a difference to something.
Nicholas, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you for having me.
Have you been out in the forest recently?
Just driving through, but I haven't been, on any long hikes or anything like that lately.
How often do you go on a hike by yourself through the forest?
I used to do it often. I used to hike, not necessarily every day, but pretty regularly. I think the past couple of years, and this year specifically, that has gone down to 0.
Why? Oh, just because, you're not going to get COVID from a squirrel or a bear.
No. Well, with during the pandemic, a lot more people have come out to the forest just because so many folks want to be in nature, and the Angeles is seeing, at the peak, we were seeing about 4 times our normal sort of visitorship that we would normally expect to see. And so it was pretty overwhelming.
Now, what does that do to the forest to have that many people walking through there?
It's just chaotic. Obviously with the current situation with COVID, it makes what would have normally been sort of a safer space to go, a potential place for a super spread. When you start thinking about like thousands of people, every weekend want to come to the forest, and then on some days, plus holidays and the whole deal. So it kind of, it definitely, forced us to have to make some adjustments to accommodate that.
Now, first, maybe you should just introduce yourself. Just tell me who you are and what your job is.
So Nicholas Butler, I am the district ranger for the Los Angeles Gateway Ranger District here on the Angeles National Forest in LA County.
And tell us a little bit, because we all want to go there when we can. So how do we get there? Where is that?
Good question. So in general, if you are driving on the 10 freeway, you can, or the 210 freeway, and then let's say you're driving towards the ocean, so you're going west. As soon as you come into LA County, the mountains are going to be on your right-hand side. So that is the Angeles National Forest. Essentially until you get to, I would say, Glendale.
Yeah.
So that's the Angeles.
How much acreage is it?
About 700,000 acres.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Angeles is 72 or 73% of all the green space in LA County. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. So
right. Now,
sorry. I was gonna say, what's the bad thing? Why is it bad?
Well, I will say the disadvantage of that was when all the beaches and parks were closed, and the only place people could go was a forest, and so that's where everyone went.
Does when there's so much traffic in the forest, does it hurt its ability to maintain itself? Is there so much people walking on it, and the animals get scared from that?
So, not in the sense of foot traffic, right? So if you think of the Angeles has a little break between it, and then there's the Highway 14 that passes through. So to give you an idea, from the LA County boundary all the way to the Ventura County boundary, we have the Angeles. And so Pyramid Lake, that area, we call it the Old Saugus portion of the forest. And so there are parts of the forest where there's a lot more foot traffic. The area that, like the Altadena area, we call it the front country, so the foot traffic isn't so much what causes the impact, it's just what comes with all the foot traffic.
Oh, the cars or the...
a lot of people driving, because we get fires that start from car fires, right? Like and the 5 freeway passes through the forest. So and then we also get, sometimes people will litter, obviously, and sometimes people like to color outside the lines,
Right.
so to speak. We have a lot of designated trails, and sometimes
Right.
folks want to be more adventurous and go off the designated trails.
You know,
Now, how much of the forest is even accessible?
Well, I think a lot of it, I would say a lot is
Yeah.
accessible. So there's, we have a fairly extensive trail network, but then, um, you know, and we also have, we call them fire roads, but that's just sort of an old term. There are, the dirt roads, like the backcountry roads that are
Right.
still available, um, when we need them, and we tend to only need them right when there's a fire.
And are they, because it used to be that the fire break, the expectation was that it would actually stop the fire, but it seems like the fires are so big now that they go right past them.
Well, so I think that's one of the things that is more myth than fact, I would say. So a fuel break is a piece of a puzzle, right? That we would use to manage a wildfire. So fuel breaks in and of themselves don't necessarily stop a fire. Because if we were to look at it, just for example, technically the 5 freeway or the 15 freeway, like a freeway is technically a fuel break. And so we've seen fires jump over freeways before. And so the fuel break in and of itself isn't sort of the answer. It fits into a bigger sort of organization of tools, right?
let me ask you a question. You just said, okay, people litter, which is heartbreaking. And fundamentally, how are we going to how do we help people understand why it's, first of all, what the beauty of a forest is? How are we going to get that? Like, there's so many questions I have around the work, people littering in a forest, and it kind of, so it makes me want to go back and say, what brought you to this work? You're so passionate about it. I've read some of the things, I've listened to you before. What brought you here to this
Hmm.
work?
So first I'll say, I think education helps. Unfortunately, and this is just my observation as a citizen, it seems like um, folks are a lot less connected to the land in the way that we used to be, say 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, right? So urbanization has had its costs and benefits, so to speak. Um, we people will go out to the forest and ask, hey, are there any bears here? Or, do you know somewhere in the forest where I can go where there are no bees, right? I've had people ask me those.
Right.
And right, and that's sort of, asking, is there anywhere in the ocean I can go and not get wet, right? Like that's it sounds silly when I say it that way, right? But folks are, and this is just my observation based on my education and sort of my experience, but it almost seems like the average person doesn't consider ourselves to be part of the ecosystem and part of the environment. Like we don't recognize that each of us is also a living organism in this. I know we think we can probably deduce that logically when someone says it to you, but day to day, we don't really think about our own individual sort of contribution to whatever the impacts are.
Did
Um,
you grow up in near Angeles National Forest?
I did not. So I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is it's a national park, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but
I mean, were you in the forest as a kid all the time?
I was, and I didn't. I didn't think, I don't know if that's what it was. I mean, so Hot Springs is kind of a resort town, really, more than anything else. It's not, when I tell people I grew up in Arkansas, they're like, oh, okay, so you're just from the country, right? And it's more of sort of like a resort town. It's like 50 miles from Little Rock. It's more of like a vacation destination for folks. And um, you know, I think when I was in high school, I mean, when I was younger, I played a lot in the woods, like a lot of kids. But when I was in high school, I remember uh, taking an aptitude test, and I really liked earth sciences, and it was some of the things that I really liked. And based on this aptitude test, it said, well, you should be a marine biologist. That was like the first thing on there.
Right.
And then I say, I wonder what a marine biologist does. And then a marine biologist in Arkansas just runs like a catfish farm. And I thought, well, that doesn't,
Right.
that's not what I want to do. And so, but I noticed that forester was on the list. And so I didn't know what a forester was. I sort of, I investigated it for myself. And so I told my parents, I think I want to be a forester. And I'm probably a junior in high school when I tell them this.
Right.
And their second question is like, how do you know that word? Right.
Right.
And so, but I got lucky because I was interested in it. And, my parents did something that I think it kind of contributed to my luck. My mom said, well, a friend of mine has a husband who works for the Forest Service. I can ask him if he'll do a career day for you, and you can just go hang out with him. And I don't think she thought I was going to agree to it, but I was like, absolutely, let's do that. And,
Right.
and then my dad says, well, we have one of our neighbors 2 doors down has he works for Weyerhaeuser, which is a pretty big timber company. I would say one of the bigger ones. So I shouldn't say pretty big. It's one of the bigger ones. And I'll just ask him if there's anything, if there are internships or whatever. And so he just gave me a job. Right. So
Right.
I learned how at first it was interest, and then it became passion because I got a chance to do it and learn all about it.
So when it was just interest, was it you would walk in around your house and you'd just be there and feel what the forest was like? And, was it something like that? What's interest? Is it like, I want to understand how all this, diversity flows together, how all these different kinds of things come together?
That's a good question. So the interest really was just kind of being in nature growing up. It was sort of part of my upbringing. Like I didn't have to explore, like going to the forest wasn't like a day trip or anything like that. It was sort of, nature was always all around. And for the record, it's still all around. Even if you live in Santa Monica, nature's all around. And I think a lot of times we don't look at it that way. We think that nature is sort of this ogre that lives in the hills, right? Like it's not with us. It's somewhere over there. It's mythical, and that's not the case. So, and for me, and then I'll say this, and this is halfway a joke, but mostly not. When I was younger, I knew that whatever I did for a living, whenever I grew up, I didn't want to have to just sit at a desk all day, and I didn't want to have to do calculus. And I don't know why those were the two deal breakers.
Right. Now, did you, so went from interest to you had a job. What did you, and it's like at first you're just loving what it is to be in a forest, but now what is the job presenting to you that's different in terms of understanding what the forest is and how it goes together and how to become an environmentalist, or, because ultimately now you're a ranger. So I imagine there's a lot of steps. What are the steps that take you there?
So I knew I wanted to so I was going to go to college, and I had applied to several schools, and I knew I wanted to go to school for forestry. And I think my parents were excited about it because I was certain of it, but I think they were also confused because it just wasn't one of the things that come up, right? Like people say they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or they want to be an engineer, but they don't,
What did other kids go on to do?
Oh, none of my friends from childhood even went into natural resources.
Right.
Like they're all like engineers or they went to school for business or something like that.
Now, did you stay friends with them, or did you separate because you're in the forest?
No, I still am friends with everybody, and my siblings went to school for engineering and business marketing,
Right.
and so I'm like the only forester that most of my friends and family know. I'm not the only forester I know, but I'm the only one that they know.
So what does it mean? What does it mean to be a forester?
So it's a broad term, and it just means, in essence, you practice the art or science or study of forest management. That's what it means broadly. But there's you can dive into it, and there's different kinds of foresters and different practices within forestry.
So we've had these terrible, terrible fires. To a certain extent, we could look at COVID and say that that's an environment. There's an environmental factor there. Have we been managing fires and managing forests incorrectly in that we never let them burn before now? I've heard that. I'm obviously not an expert on it, but it says that we should have a fire, like right now it's cold out, have a fire now so it doesn't go as far. Do we have to evolve in our thinking of how we manage forests for their overall health?
So I'll say we are evolving, right? I can sort of even see for myself. Like when I was a freshman in college, I can see the way that that forestry as sort of a practice has adapted over the years. I also think it's maybe it's an oversimplification that forest management is all we need to do. Because there are other factors that contribute to forest management. Just like a fuel break can't be the only answer, right? It's almost like trying to build a city with just a hammer and nails, right? Like you can't. I mean, sure, you do need a hammer and nails, but that's not going to get you as far as you think it's going to get you, right?
What are some of those other factors? What are some of those, what are the different components?
Good question. So one is public understanding, right? Like, so that's a huge undertaking, right? Because in general, people only see leaves and they know that that's a tree, but there's nothing beyond that. Like people just think nature is nature and that's it. It's here for us to enjoy. And I don't mean to sort of make it seem like no one cares, but in general, when you're a scientist, you kind of see the matrix, and when you're not, you only kind of know what brings you joy and what doesn't, and that's sort of how you operate, right? So public understanding is one. So there's some education and outreach there. And I don't think that outreach and education is one entity's responsibility, right? It can't just be the Forest Service trying to teach everybody. So there's got to be sort of a collective effort by a good number of the parties that are in the know. I think another piece of it that we've identified is community development. Right? Like, so, we're a lot more urban now than we used to be. And we have a lot of communities that are adjacent to or within some of these high potential burn areas. And so, there are Firewise community councils all over the country, but in general, like fire safing communities, and maybe some of the municipal policies and practices to sort of encourage certain architecture and private land management, right? And so so California is 100 million acres, right? Just as a state,
Wow.
a third of that is forest, and the federal land is only about 20 million of that third, right? So that means there's a whole lot of privately owned forest land, And so if you think about in a normal neighborhood, there is you might not do the same thing in your lawn or your landscaping as your neighbor. And so it all matters, right? So if one neighbor is doing fuel reduction or hazardous material removal and keeping everything manicured or just keeping everything to a standard, and then the next neighbor says, well, I think nature should just take its course, or whatever their philosophy is, that has an impact on the neighbors. Does that make sense? So there's more pieces.
Absolutely. I would say though, for the education part, I mean, and that's actually the conundrum of managing the state of California. I mean, it's that we're seeing that. I mean, that's a reputable problem. But from the education perspective, because it goes back to the question I asked you earlier, about the trash or respect or reverence, like when you meet with, I'm sure groups come through, what is the significance of a forest? What is the importance? Why do we need to protect them? Why do we need forests? I think people have lost, I don't even think people have a basic understanding of the role of
it. So I can tell you specifically, when you start thinking about the value that green space has just in our personal life, just in Los Angeles County. So if we were to just talk about Los Angeles County, so we know that places where there is no pavement, there are better chances for water to absorb into the soil. Obviously, if it's landing on rocks, that's not what I'm talking about. But we also know, water table recharge. We know that most of our drinking water passes through or comes into the Angeles National Forest, right? And so forest management is more watershed management than it is just managing trees. The other thing we know is that forested land, and when I say forest, I mean forest in the broadest sense. And so from a forest ecology standpoint, I think of it as whatever the ecotype is, right? So we could have a forest can be what some people call a prairie. That doesn't mean that it's devoid of trees. It just means that there's not very many trees per acre. It's mostly, grasses or whatever, right? So we think of these areas that are vegetated, and they often serve as carbon sinks, right? So because this is all part of it. This is part of the value. So nature has all of these intrinsic values that really reap the benefit. We call them ecosystem services, right? So that's the importance. It's not just drinking water. It's not just shade. It's not just those things.
A lot of kids in the inner city never see a forest. A lot of kids in the inner city might think that they don't even know where that vegetables grow from, right? Because they're just not exposed to a farm. When you have people, and even this can be true of people too, do you have people, have you seen it in their face when they're in the forest, a transformation from being out in nature and finally understanding what it is?
I've seen that. I think that I can't speak to sort of when we turn the corner. I'd have to do some research to say it with confidence, but it seems pretty apparent to me that we've started to get more, like our entertainment and the things that we do to recreate tend to be less in the forest. And most people have sort of these experiences where they visited the forest for summer camp or something like that. And that's probably got more to do with where you grew up than not. Because, certain places you probably, if you grew up in, I don't know, inland Oregon, right? Like you probably don't need to go to summer camp to be experiencing the forest. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Up in Banff National Park, they built these bridges. I think there's 5 or 6, maybe more, where the animals can go across,
Yep.
And I think we're starting to do that here. Is that a change in the way we think about animals and what they require, so they don't have to run across the 10?
I think we have adapted. And so what they're doing at Banff, they are doing that in a number of countries. We do it in the United States too. When I say we, I just mean the United States. I'm not necessarily saying the Forest Service specifically. You know, just like any other science, we like wildlife biology. There are things we know, and then there are things that we realize, we didn't know, as we move along, right? And so, with habitat fragmentation, we've identified ways over the years to maybe help with that. And I haven't read a ton of reports about it or white papers, but I do know that the consensus does seem to be that things like wildlife passages seem to be effective enough to use them as a practice.
How long have you been working in the forest?
I've been working for the Angeles National Forest for about 10 years, but I've been working in a forest for over 20.
So, has your understanding of the forest, of the way we conservation, has it changed being close to it for this period of time? Has your philosophical outlook on it changed?
I will say that the more, over the years, I've come to realize the more we think we know, the more we realize we don't know that much. I think that's probably the biggest change in my philosophy.
Have you been surprised when you've been out in the forest ever?
Surprised.
Well, have you ever come across a mountain lion or a bear?
Yeah,
or
I want to know. What
just you and a mountain lion, or
or how about a Bigfoot? Maybe a Bigfoot.
No, like a mountain lion or a bear.
That's no, haven't seen Bigfoot yet, but I've seen mountain lions, but I've never encountered one. Like one-on-one where I had to fight them off or anything like that. But yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff in the woods, and I didn't realize how. And there's a lot of stuff I've never seen a condor. Like I've never come across a California condor, but I've definitely.
And they're in the national forest somewhere. The Angeles, no?
Say it again.
They're in the Angeles National Forest somewhere, yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I know where they are. I just haven't encountered them.
Right.
Do you, Nicholas? Do you go out like by yourself a lot and just, do you still enjoy, the kind of what you had as a little kid growing up in Arkansas? But like when you're out there, is it like I get to do this? Do you still have the interest, the affection, the curiosity? Is it still? Is it your calling? Do you think?
I definitely think it's my calling. I would say. I mean. And just, I would say there are days where it's probably not as glamorous as as I want it to look, but on a normal day, I mean, I do find myself, feeling really appreciative that I get to do this kind of stuff for a living. So
and the other rangers that you're up there with, do they feel this? Is it the same kind of feeling about those people? Do you find that there's a certain kind of person who's chosen to be a ranger?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a certain. I mean, I think so with the Forest Service, and let me give you this as a sort of as a way of kind of delineating. So we kind of use the term ranger, just sort of, to describe anyone who works for the agency, right? But, with the Forest Service, the ranger is actually a job title, right? So a district ranger is a job title, right? And then there are folks who work for the district ranger, I shouldn't say work for, but the district ranger supervises a number of people. But the public typically just calls us all rangers. And so I would say, I'll say that I do think there is a certain type of person who goes into this type of public service because, you know, I mean, number one, I mean, if let's say you decided you wanted to go into recreation management, well, it's hard to imagine that you're not doing it for the love, because I mean, you're just dealing with people that want to come play, right? Like you don't open up a pizza restaurant because you just love children's pizza parties. Like they're they're pretty intense, right? Like
Yeah, it's part of it.
well, you're not doing it for the money, right? Like you're doing it because there's got to be something there that sort of inspires you. So I would say that most of the folks that especially that work for the Forest Service kind of have I think a love for what they're doing. That's not to say there aren't a few people that are grumpy some days, but I just can't imagine someone coming into a job where they're going out in the forest, and whether they like their coworkers or not, everybody's got their own personality. But I don't imagine that people stick around for 20 and 30 and 40 years because they hate it so much.
Yeah.
Right. The benefits aren't that good, right?
Yeah. Have you been able to travel around the United States and visited other forests? And are there any that you particularly, remember or think about? Wow, pretty incredible.
Well, yes. I feel like I felt that way about every forest. I mean, so when you visit other forests, you usually, I mean, I always try to go and at least see one or two things that I can really appreciate. But forests that really kind of stuck with me. So I'll say in the California Southern Pacific region, which is California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. I would say probably the Sequoia was a pretty cool forest to work on for a little while, and
because of the size of the trees and the.
Yes, yeah, that was the very first forest that I worked on in California, and this was back in 2001. 2000 or 2001. It's been a few years. And I don't think I had ever seen trees that big. In the rest of the country, trees don't get as big as they get in California. At least not as often as they do here.
Yeah. And
so it was kind of breathtaking to see that, because in Arkansas or in Mississippi, I went to Mississippi State for my undergrad. A big tree is like 20 inches or 24 inches or 30. These are big trees. But here, I mean,
they're old too.
Yeah.
So is it different? Is it cathedral-like being with these trees?
Very much so. Very much so. The other place that comes to mind, since you asked, so I spent some time on the Santa Fe National Forest, and I just thought that was interesting as well, because it had this, the area that I was in was, it was the Pecos, Las Vegas Ranger District. And I'm not even sure if that's what it's still called, but that was sort of my first time being around that alpine, really dense spruce forest type of setting. And I just thought it looked really cool. I imagine their wildfires are out of control, but it was just really, something to see for me at the time.
Is it different when you're in the forest in the winter versus the summer?
It depends on the forest. In Southern California, I mean, not really. I mean, we have, I think it was 80 degrees a couple of days ago. So, I would imagine, there was a ton of people out just because it was a nice day to be outside. When you go up further north, it snows. Right now, it's snowing in other parts of the Forest Service. So, the way you're interacting with the forest is a little different, I think.
Right. Have you been to Yosemite?
I have not. Yosemite is one of the places I haven't had a chance to visit. And people ask me that all the time. And I keep saying, well, not yet. And I don't know how I've allowed Yosemite to escape me,
Yeah.
but I haven't had a chance to visit Yosemite yet.
Now, if you went to Yosemite and you were just out looking at it and you were just there and there were people there, would you still be a ranger? Would you just automatically go back into your ranger persona, or would you just be like, I'm not on duty?
No, I don't. If I'm just out for a hike or a mountain bike ride or whatever I'm doing, I need my downtime. I don't do that. Like even if I'm out on the forest and I'm in uniform and I'm official duty,
right.
It really does depend on, like, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I need some help. It sort of depends on what they need help with.
Yeah.
Because I generally speaking, once people find out like you are the ranger, like they, like right. The ranger, they just sort of like latch on to you a little bit. So
I want to ask you a question. Clarify something. You said 20 inches in those trees or 20 feet?
20-inch diameter. So trees are measured in diameter. Yeah.
I think they're measured in feet. I know nothing about trees, or very little.
Well, that counts too. But so typically what we look at is how big in diameter a tree is. But height is also important. But the sequoias they're taller than all the other trees and they're bigger.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. You know that expression, when a tree falls in the forest, like, and nobody hears it, or is that what it is? Or is that what it is?
Yeah. Does anybody hear it? I think.
What does that mean to you? Does that have meaning to you at all? Do you ever think about that, as you spend your time out there?
I've thought about that. I think if you look at that question as what difference does it really make? Well, then, yes, somebody hears it, right? Because remember, everything is nature. And so everything is a part of a habitat, even though we don't necessarily think of, you probably don't think the pavement outside your house is habitat, but it is. It's just how big is your microscope? And so when a tree falls in the forest, all that is it makes a difference to something, right? We don't know what it is yet, whether it's insects, songbirds, there are all these sort of, we call them dynamics, right? So whether they're stand dynamics or dynamics of silviculture, and that's another word I can give you we're probably gonna have to do a definition list, but each thing has an effect. And sometimes the effect is more trees grow in that same place, or it creates, an ideal location for, something to nest there or rest there. So it does make a difference.
Thank you so much. The idea that I think people watching or listening to this, to think about, we don't think about nature. We think of it as it's over there, it's at the beach, it's in the forest, it's somewhere else. And this idea that it's right here, we are part of it, is a really important idea that we really do need to take on right now as climate crisis is really real and all the challenges. But you've gotten me inspired that I'm going to go out and visit. I need to get out of my house a little bit. So I definitely will be taking a drive out there.
For sure.
Sure. Thank you so much for coming on and for doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas, very much. Really appreciate you giving us insight into the forest and what it does. Thank you very much.
Well, thank y'all for having me.